Deathloop is the latest game from Arkane Studios, a developer with a 20-year history of making deep, immersive worlds filled with interlocking gameplay systems. Most famous for its Dishonored series, each of Arkane's games are notably different, but they are all built on a set of common principles that the developer has honed and improved over the years. But what exactly are those principles, and how do they fit together? Simply put, what exactly is an Arkane game? It's a question that only someone who helped build these games can truly answer. That's why we spoke to Dinga Bakaba, creative director at Arkane's Lyon studio, to discover the intricacies of making an immersive sim and how things have changed from Dishonored to Deathloop.
Essentially, all games are hybrids. That's really something that I would say is the defining DNA. We do hybrids, and that means that we blend together different types of games, different kind of experiences, in order to create those experiences that are very immersive. So they are action games, most of them at the very root. Those games share some DNA, some design philosophy and everything, which some people call the immersive sim, and that's applied to different genres. Arx Fatalis was an RPG. I would say Dark Messiah was a first-person fighter. Dishonored is a stealth action game, and that Prey is an adventure survival RPG.
Continuing this trend, Deathloop sees Arkane creating a brand new hybrid based on a genre it has plenty of experience with, the first-person shooter. But it's also a genre that the studio has had bad luck with. Both of its shooters, the Half-Life 2 sequel Return to Ravenholm and The Crossing, a single-player campaign with a PvP invasion mechanic, were cancelled and never released.
When we looked at our last game and wanted to see what kind of DNA we wanted to be stronger, we definitely dialed up the first-person shooter DNA. The Crossing and Ravenholm didn't ship. We actually didn't ship an actual kind of straight shooter, which is weird because we made two of them. And we always think about having made them, but people didn't play them.
Deathloop's shooter ideas are spliced with something altogether different, an investigation puzzle. The game world is stuck in a time loop, and players must work out how to escape from a never-ending cycle of living and dying. The two ideas are combined to create something that upholds the cerebral smarts of Dishonored, but further explores the possibilities of more energetic combat encounters. The genre elements that go into these hybrids dictate the gameplay systems that each project will be built upon, but those systems must exist within a play space, and that space must be a compelling location to explore. That's why Arkane is as much a world builder as it is a systems designer. Each of its games are set in believable, detailed locations, drawn in a distinct art style that acts as one of the studio's hallmarks.
The company Arkane was founded in order to make a tribute game to Ultima Underworld, which is Arx Fatalis. So if we look back at Ultima Underworld and Origin systems, they had this motto, we create worlds. So we didn't steal that, but indeed, that's a passion of ours, like creating worlds. And even in the one time we did sequels, Dishonored 2, it's a sequel, still, we couldn't help creating a new world, even if it was in the same world. It's really a passion for us. It is something that is a joint effort between the art team and the design team. The way we are structured now in Arkane Lyon is that creative direction is actually co-owned between Sébastien, who is art director, and myself as the game director. And that's like we, again, hybridize as a creative director. And we think this balance is extremely important. When we say art for us, it's not just visuals. It's also inspirations, it's also sometimes meaning what interesting story the place itself is telling. Like there is probably like Dunwall, Talos 1, Karnaca are characters in themselves. So they need a past, they need a future in our headcanon. We try to layer history, meaning.
In Dishonored's Dunwall, every corner of the city demonstrates its reliance on the cruel whale hunting trade. The technology that powers its buildings and defences are all fueled by blubber oil. Prey's Talos 1 station is home to a museum that charts an entire alternate history, rooted in the idea that President Kennedy was not assassinated. It's these fully realised histories that make Arkane's locations feel more like real worlds than video game levels. Arkane's worlds may feel real, but fundamentally they still have to be false. Every street, room, and rooftop is carefully crafted to ensure these locations work first and foremost as video game levels. Thankfully, believable worlds and fantastic levels are not mutually exclusive, and can be used to inform one another.
All these things, they make sense historically, architecturally, but they also make sense in terms of level design and game experience and where we wanted to go. Prey was a lot about owning a space that is contiguous, which we hadn't done since Arx Fatalis. So it was a lot of effort, again, defining that space, how spaces connect to one another, the fact that you can go outside the station, it has to make sense in terms of proportion and architecture, like all that. And then in terms of gameplay, provide interesting opportunities that can be weighed one compared to the other. In one overview of the situation, you need to be able to say, okay, so there is these guys here having a conversation, that's not a good place to be, but there's a room just behind them on the wall. So that's a puzzle suddenly. It becomes a puzzle, but it's also a scene of life. We see these guards living. And this is a place that you can access through various areas. One area might be the one where you have the best tactical overview on the situation. The other one might be the one where you can overhear the conversation the best.
The time looping structure of Deathloop has allowed Arkane to further experiment with this approach. The design means that players will not only be frequently revisiting the same locations on different loops, but also exploring those areas at different times of day. This has allowed Arkane to present different gameplay opportunities, both from loop to loop and within the same loop, depending on if players explore during morning, noon, afternoon, or evening.
This is not a game that tries to funnel you to the narrative beats, because you're going to come back anyway. So if you interrupt a scene, well, we don't care. You can come back the next day and see it. Thanks to that, we were able to make the environment even more open-ended than we used to, because you're going to go into these areas for different goals. Sometimes it's to read this note, sometimes it's to kill this person. So this same area really needs to support all these approaches and play styles. And so if anything, they are even more organic than before. Yeah, the time loop permeates basically everything, from level design to gameplay features to story to art. It's not a game with a time loop, it's really a time loop the game.
To help navigate and overcome challenges within these worlds, Arkane provides players with a varied selection of equipment and powers. Known as a toolkit, these items range from the straightforward to the bizarre, and are designed to be used in combination with both one another and the environment. With so many elements interacting with each other, it makes crafting the perfect toolkit quite a challenge for Arkane's designers.
Like for instance, Dishonored 1, we sometimes question whether we should have the crossbow and the gun, where it's basically kill people from afar. We could have just added a silencer to the gun, or or make the crossbow more action-oriented. But in the end, we decided that it's an expressive choice. Go loud or go silent, stealthier, more precise. And we made both those weapons farther from one another.
With Deathloop, Arkane has the opportunity to deeper explore conventional weaponry. Where Dishonored and Prey offered guns that were essentially tools with triggers more than they were regular firearms, Deathloop has an arsenal of wild weapons that would make John Wick proud.
As we set out to make a shooter, the first thing was, hey, we need satisfying weapons. We wanted to try our hands at everything. We wanted, big guns that spit big bullets that do big damage, like video game guns. We didn't start with realism in mind. It was a comic book. We then said, okay, let's go a little bit crazy with those weapons, and we added some kind of quality system where the crappy weapons will jam and they are not super good, and the high tier weapons are more efficient, but they have also a unique perk. And then for the powers, we made the choice to do something that was familiar to anyone who played Dishonored. So there is several abilities that are, a tweaked version of something we had in Dishonored, and that was on purpose because we approached it by thinking, okay, if we are going to do all these things that are new, we also want some familiarity, some things we feel comfortable about and that are known quantities in our gameplay loop and toolkit. So if you're an Arkane fan, then you probably will feel right at home and say, okay, that part of the toolkit, I'm already good at it, so it kind of pays off.
With so many weapons, powers, and environmental systems at play, it's inevitable that something will go wrong sooner than later. That's why the perfect balance of these many elements is only achievable through rigorous playtesting, which must be conducted all the way through the development process.
We do a lot of playtesting. Internal, but also with friends and family, and also with, focus tests and larger panels. And this is important, sometimes heartbreaking when something doesn't work, but that's the most healthy way, we think, to go at it. We are making games that put the player in control a lot. And we really at Arkane have a code that we shouldn't judge what's really the most fun. And the best way to do that, and sometimes help us make decisions when we have disagreement in the team, is letting the players tell us. We need to appeal and give them something meaningful, and it's definitely something you cannot do without asking them. Putting the player in the driver's seat basically means interacting with them from all stages of production, not only at the end when the game is pretty to look at and well-tuned and not bugged. So again, thanks to all the people who played very broken builds of Dishonored, Prey, and our other games. It's extremely important and valuable.
Since the recent Bethesda acquisition, Arkane is now one of Microsoft's first-party studios, which will hopefully provide it with the resources needed to continue to innovate. We can already see with the recently announced Redfall that Arkane is exploring new ground and experimenting with an open-world cooperative shooter. But for all that is new, Arkane will always build on its foundational values.
We always will be caring a lot about giving players choices, interesting choices, options, etc., etc. The how will evolve from one project to the next. Honestly, if that company exists because we want to put the player in the driver's seat, that's not to go back on that, ever. But it will be in different contexts. Hopefully it's not the exact same choices having the exact same consequences, but just with a different skin. Else, what's the purpose of, spending all these years working on something and injecting love and effort into them if it's to do the same thing over and over.
Arkane's values have their roots in the immersive sims of the 1990s and early 2000s, and with key members of the studio's staff having previously worked on the original Deus Ex, those ideals aren't likely to go away. But Arkane intends to seek a balance between the best of the old and the opportunities of the new.
We basically talk a lot about this tradition and modernity paradigm. It's always an interesting dialogue, but I think that's how Arkane is Arkane. That's what Dark Messiah is what it is, Prey is what it is, Dishonored is what it is, because it is taking this DNA, taking this legacy, I would say, but staying modern, staying relevant. I hope that going forward we can continue to have this balance between tradition and modernity. Make games that feel like Arkane games, where people will sometimes feel at home immediately, and sometimes, because it's pleasant for us, propose something different and see how players react to that, how it can be a dialogue between us and the community that results in, again, innovative games that take risks, that we are passionate making, and hopefully players are passionate playing.
By breathing new life into old-school values again and again through its hybrid philosophy, Arkane has cemented itself a reputation as one of the smartest studios in the AAA space. And while each of its new games may look different to the last, the explosive battles of Deathloop are in stark contrast to the dark and stealthy Dishonored, there's a constant set of ideals that flows through them all. That is Arkane's design DNA, and it remains strong from generation to generation. For more, check out the story so far of Arkane Studios, as well as our Deathloop preview. And for everything else, stick with IGN.